I found her name buried in a place most people never look. Auction ledgers from 1847. 12 plantations collapsed in just 10 years. 12 owners dead, bankrupt, or driven mad. And standing silently in every record was the same woman. Her description never changed. Beautiful, quiet, sold again. Each time she entered a new house, something inside that house began to rot. Marriages cracked, overseers stole, crops burned, and men who believed they controlled everything lost everything. Before we go deeper into the story of Celeste, the woman who walked through the South like a shadow, subscribe and comment your state below. Hidden history like this is never taught. We uncover it here. Because the real question isn't how 12 estates fell. The real question is, what happens when a system built on suffering meets someone who refuses to break? I didn't start with ghosts. I started with numbers. In the winter of last year, I was studying estate liquidation files from Georgia's coastal counties, dry, handwritten documents that most people would skim and forget. I was searching for something completely different, a shipping dispute involving cotton exports. But then I saw a name that stopped me cold. Celeste. Written in tight, careful ink. Age 22. Description: house servant. Exceptional appearance. Quiet demeanor. There was nothing unusual about a single name. The archives hold thousands, people bought, sold, and erased by the system that claimed to own them. But when I flipped the next ledger, I saw her again. And then again. And again. Same age. Same description. Same woman. 12 times. 12 different owners. 12 different plantations. All in a tight 5-year window between 1847 and 1852. And every time her name appeared, the estate she entered collapsed months later. Estate number 1, foreclosure. Estate number 2, widow in court. Estate number 3, suicide. Estate number 4, fire. Estate number 5, death by fever. Estate number 6, partnership destroyed. Estate number 7, overseer killed. Estate number 8, arrest. Estate number 9, madness. Estate number 10, drowning. Estate number 11, collapse of inheritance. Estate number 12, a final confrontation. All triggered after the same woman was bought. At first, I thought the ledgers were mislabeled. Auction houses sometimes made mistakes. Clerks reused old descriptions to speed up the sales. But as I dug deeper, I realized something more chilling. These were 12 completely separate legal documents from different counties, written by different men, all describing the same enslaved woman with the same silent presence. And every time she appeared in the records, someone lost everything. I leaned back in my chair in the Savannah archive room and stared at the pages fanned out across my table. The pattern didn't feel natural. It felt deliberate. It felt like the beginning of a story whispered behind church fans and plantation parlor walls, too dangerous to speak aloud, too strange to ignore. When you research enough hidden history, you learn something important. The things people don't write down are louder than the things they do. And the archivists, who usually stay silent and neutral, had already warned me. Some names carry storms with them. Celeste is one of those names. I pulled the oldest document toward me. March 14, 1847, Savannah Exchange. Her first recorded sale. Price, $2,300. A shocking number for a single domestic worker. The average was $500 to $800. Why did 12 of the wealthiest men in Georgia's coastal counties spend fortunes to purchase the same woman? What did they see when they looked at her? The more pages I turned, the more I felt it. Unease. Not because she was violent. Not because she rebelled. Not because she led uprisings or poisoned wells or burned fields. No, she did something far more frightening. She survived. And somehow, every man who believed he owned her did not. I collected each ledger entry and placed them in chronological order. A story began forming, quiet at first, then roaring like water breaking through a dam. The coastal counties of Georgia were the crown jewels of Southern wealth in the 1840s. Vast cotton empires. Rice mansions built from slave labor. Men who believed their power was absolute. Yet in this world of control and cruelty, one enslaved woman kept slipping through the cracks of their control. She was bought, sold, bought again, but never broken. What struck me most was her description. Never rebellious. Never disobedient. Never problematic. Always one word. Quiet. In a system built on punishment, the most dangerous person is never the one who screams. It's the one who watches. I found a brief note from an auctioneer, written in the margin of the ledger. Eyes dark. Does not look at bidders directly. Seems elsewhere. elsewhere. As if she didn't belong to the room she stood in, or the chains around her wrists, or the world that claimed to own her. The deeper I went, the more I realized how invisible she was to the men who wrote these records. They noticed her beauty. They noticed her silence. But they never noticed themselves, the way their own desires, debts, and secrets spiraled the moment she entered their homes. The story of Celeste isn't a supernatural legend. It isn't witchcraft. It isn't magic. It's something more terrifying. A system collapsing under the weight of its own brutality, exposed by the presence of one woman who refused to break. Before we dive into how the first plantation fell, and how death arrived in a room filled with candles, velvet curtains, and whispered intentions, if you're still watching, you care about buried history. Subscribe and comment your state or country below. Now tell me, in a world built on chains, what does it mean when the quietest person becomes the most dangerous? 1831 Georgia. One woman sold. One pattern begins. Would you have noticed her name? The first collapse in the chain began with a man named Colonel Marcus Fenwick, a widower, wealthy planter, and one of the most respected landowners in Chatham County. His life was a portrait painted in money, polished floors, imported crystal, high ceilings, and the quiet cruelty all Southern aristocrats hid behind their manners. And into that perfect house, he brought Celeste. The auction record from March 14, 1847 shows something strange. Bidding opened at $400, normal for a house servant. But then something happened in the exchange hall. Men who prided themselves on cold intelligence, men who bought people the way farmers buy mules, started bidding like gamblers losing control. Voices rose. Chairs scraped. Even the auctioneer noted the atmosphere shifting the moment she stepped onto the platform in her gray dress. When the dust settled, Fenwick paid $2,300. The archivist in Savannah pointed at the number and whispered to me, "Only two types of men paid that much, fools or lonely ones." In Fenwick's case, he was both. His diary pages are destroyed, but his daughter's journal remains. In trembling handwriting she wrote, "Father's new girl is so beautiful the house feels different now. Quiet. Too quiet. The others avoid her. I cannot explain why." That sentence, "The house feels different now." It appears repeatedly across every estate Celeste ever entered. At first, her job was simple: laundry, setting the table, turning down the colonel's bed. But Fenwick began finding excuses to summon her alone. Bring the lamp. Fetch my coat. Attend the study. Small commands from a man who had not remarried since his wife's death. This detail mattered later. Because every man who purchased her bought more than labor. They bought temptation, and everyone around them knew it. Plantation wives whispered, "Why pay that much? What is she really for?" The enslaved people felt it first. A house has its own kind of weather, and Celeste changed the air the way a cold front changes a room. Servants went quiet when she entered. Footsteps softened. Even the cook, a woman who had survived 30 years of serving Fenwick, wrote in a note later archived. When she walked through the hall, the candles flicker like wind behind her. But the true turning point came on the night of May 8, 1847. I read 12 accounts of that night, some from court papers, some from letters, some from the overseer's report. All tell the same story. The colonel dined alone as always. Roasted quail, spring greens, claret wine. Celeste served each dish with the same silence she carried like a second skin. At 9 p.m. she was dismissed. At 10 p.m. the screaming began. His daughter described it as the sound of a man being pulled out of himself. By the time the family reached the study, Fenwick was on the floor, clawing at his throat, eyes bulging, lips foaming. The doctor, the same doctor who later appears in multiple Celeste cases, arrived too late. Official cause, apoplexy. Modern guess, poison possibly administered earlier. Problem, no trace found. But what interested me wasn't how Fenwick died. It was what fell apart after. Because his death didn't end with a funeral. It triggered a collapse that spread through his entire estate like rot through old wood. His rice fields had underperformed. His shipping investments had failed. His debts were larger than anyone realized. The moment Marcus Fenwick stopped breathing, his enemies, creditors, and neighbors acted like vultures hovering above a wounded animal. Within 90 days, Fenwick Hall was in receivership. The family lost everything. Even the enslaved people, 200 souls, were torn apart and sold in pieces to settle unpaid debts. And Celeste? She stood quietly at auction again. Not a single accusation tied her to the death. Not one witness blamed her. She simply stepped onto the platform, eyes distant, hands folded. Her price dropped to $1,400. Her new buyer was Theodore Calhoun of Liberty County. As I read deeper into the Fenwick collapse, I felt an unsettling truth rise in my chest. This wasn't murder in the way we imagine murder. This was something slower, something colder, something that didn't need knives or fire. Fenwick didn't fall because of her. He fell because he was already standing on fractures: loneliness, debt, pride, secrecy. Her presence only revealed what was already breaking. And as I closed the folder containing the First Estate's downfall, I realized something chilling. She didn't kill these men. She simply watched them destroy themselves. 1847 Georgia. 1 man dead. 11 remain. Tell me, do you still think it was coincidence? Or was the pattern already beginning? Would you have seen the danger in her silence? If the fall of Fenwick Hall had been a lightning strike, sudden, loud, impossible to ignore, the next collapse was something different. It was slow, soft, like a sickness creeping through the walls of a house that wasn't ready to admit it was already dying. Her second owner, Theodore Calhoun, ran Liberty Oaks Plantation, a Sea Island cotton estate known for two things: fine cotton and fine gossip. He was a man of ambition, always reaching higher, always believing he could outsmart fate. He bought Celeste thinking she would bring elegance into his home. Instead, she brought silence. Calhoun's wife, Margaret, kept a diary, and that diary is one of the most haunting documents I have ever held. When I first opened it in the Charleston archive, the pages smelled of old wood and wilted roses, ink faded but still sharp enough to feel her fear. Each line was a breadcrumb, leading deeper into a story she didn't realize she was trapped in. In the first week after Celeste's arrival, Margaret wrote, "She stands by the window at night. She claims she is only listening for father's carriage, but I cannot shake the feeling she hears something else. Something else." That phrase returned again, and again, and again. Margaret was a lonely woman, a young wife, married to an older man who cared more about cotton prices than human warmth. She craved companionship. And in that loneliness, she let Celeste closer than any mistress normally allowed. She wrote, "I talk to her more than I should. She never speaks unless I ask her something. But her silence listens." That line hit me hard. Her silence listens. Celeste didn't ask questions. She didn't pry. She didn't provoke. She just listened. And in a house filled with secrets, the person who listens is more dangerous than the one who speaks. By the middle of July, something cracked inside Margaret's mind. Her entries become shaky, rushed, frantic. I dreamed she stood at the foot of my bed watching me. When I woke, she was still there, holding my tea. I do not know if the dream ended or continued. A single servant, assigned to attend her every evening, began blending into Margaret's fears until she stopped knowing where Celeste ended and dread began. Then Theodore Calhoun fell ill. Not with fever, not with infection, but with something much stranger. Every document describes the same pattern. Food tasted metallic. Water felt heavy. He refused meals, grew weak, lost weight, mutters about seeing shadows move. When I read Dr. Pritchard's notes, I noticed something chilling. These were the same symptoms Fenwick had, but slower. Calhoun's condition deteriorated for 2 weeks. Margaret wrote, "He looks at me as if I am the stranger, as if someone else has taken my place. Celeste brings him broth. He refuses it. The house feels cold even in August." The final entry before his death. "She stood in the hallway tonight. The candle near her went out. I don't know if it was wind. There was no wind." Theodore Calhoun died in early September 1847, officially from coastal fever. But 3 details make this suspicious. No one else in the house had fever-like symptoms. The doctor noted mental distress as a strong factor. A new will was discovered, signed 3 weeks earlier, which cut Margaret out of most inheritance. The diary hints she suspected someone influenced him, but she didn't say who. After his death, the estate collapsed almost immediately. The cotton was damaged by storms and insects. The overseers fought each other over who was to blame. Debts poured in. Creditors circled. The Calhoun Empire, which took decades to build, fell apart in fewer than 2 months. Margaret tried to fight the will in court, but she didn't stand a chance. She was left with almost nothing. And Celeste? Sold again. But before her sale, one more chilling diary entry appeared, the last one Margaret ever wrote. Today she stood by the door as the lawyers loaded his papers. I asked her if she felt anything for what happened here. She looked at me with those still, quiet eyes and said nothing, not a word. But something in her silence answered me. When I closed the diary in the archive room, I sat there for a long time. thinking about that final sentence. Not speaking is one thing. Being understood without speaking is something else entirely. 2 estates gone. 2 families broken. 2 houses turned from mansions into ruins. And almost no one noticed the pattern. Because when powerful men fall, people rarely ask 3 questions. Who was in the room? Who was watching? And who walked away untouched? 1848 Liberty County. Another man dead. Another estate gone. Now I ask you, in a house filled with secrets, would you trust the quiet one? By the time I reached Celeste's 3rd sale, I expected violence. A fire. A murder. A rebellion. But what I found instead was something far quieter. Something that made me realize her presence didn't create chaos. It revealed it. The 3rd buyer was James Hartwell of Bryan County. An older man. Deeply religious. Known for his calm leadership and humane treatment of the enslaved, at least by the standards of plantation society. His wife, Catherine Hartwell, ran the household with rigid order. Meal schedules, prayer times, bedtimes, perfect table settings. Her home was her kingdom. And when Celeste entered that kingdom, the first cracks appeared. According to a surviving letter from a neighbor woman, Catherine had personally approved Celeste's purchase. She answered each question with such quiet grace. Mrs. Hartwell seemed soothed by her. That line, seemed soothed by her, would haunt me in later records too. In the beginning, everything appeared normal. The Hartwells even hosted a Christmas ball that year. Guests later recalled seeing Celeste moving through the hallways with trays of punch, her face blank, her footsteps soft, drawing glances without drawing attention. But in January, the truth began to surface. Catherine Hartwell, strong, orderly, disciplined, fell sick. At first it was small things. Headaches, dizziness, nausea that wouldn't go away. She dismissed it as winter weakness, according to Dr. Pritchard's notes. But the symptoms deepened quickly. She could barely rise from bed. She complained of numbness in her hands and feet. She told her husband she woke from nightmares she could not remember, and yet she woke with the feeling that someone had been standing over her. Her maid later testified in a private letter, never in court. She said Celeste was always quiet. Too quiet. Always behind her. Always watching. She said she could feel the girl's eyes even when she wasn't in the room. By February, Catherine's condition worsened so much that James brought in a specialist from Charleston. Nothing helped. Her skin grew pale. Her appetite disappeared. Her voice grew weak. And then, in small moments of clarity, her mind drifted to secrets she had never spoken aloud. According to a letter Catherine wrote to her sister, never sent but found in her belongings. Each night I tell her more. I don't know why. I know I shouldn't. But when she sits near my bed, I cannot stop. Tell her more. The same pattern we saw with Margaret Calhoun. Celeste didn't need to ask. Didn't need to manipulate. Didn't need to threaten. People simply poured their secrets into her silence. On March 3, 1848, Catherine Hartwell died. The official cause: failure of the vital organs due to nervous disease. But the most disturbing detail wasn't Catherine's death. It was what happened next. With Catherine gone, James Hartwell spiraled into grief. He withdrew from social life. Stopped monitoring his accounts. Stopped reviewing shipments. Stopped paying attention to the plantation he once managed with military precision. And in that blind spot, evil grew. An overseer, trusted for years, had been stealing from him. Not small amounts. Not single shipments. For years, he had pocketed money while forging entries in the plantation books. James never noticed. Not until Catherine's sickness had consumed him. When auditors finally reviewed the records, they found missing cotton shipments, fake numbers, thousands of dollars in stolen profit. The overseer fled before arrest. And James Hartwell? He broke. Letters show he sank into deep melancholy, the kind that swallowed men whole in the 1800s. Neighbors wrote he looked half dead, half gone, wandering through his halls as if searching for someone who wasn't there anymore. On April 10, 1848, he locked himself in his study. By morning he was dead. A bottle of laudanum, the painkiller of the time, sat empty on his desk. The coroner called it suicide due to grief and financial collapse. I sat in the archive reading that line over and over. One woman enters a home. A wife dies after months of whispered confessions. A husband collapses mentally. A massive embezzlement scheme is exposed. The overseer vanishes. The estate fails. And Celeste is sold again. Coincidence? Maybe. But it was becoming harder to ignore the pattern. When Celeste walked through a man's door, everything he failed to protect, every secret, every fault, every enemy, came crawling into the light. Her presence wasn't a knife, it was a mirror. And every master who bought her saw, some for the first time, what was lurking beneath the surface of their perfect lives. When Hartwell Manor went to auction, Celeste was listed as Lot 13. Her price dropped again, from $1,400 to $900. She left that estate the same way she left all the others. Quiet, calm, untouched. 3 estates gone. 3 families destroyed. 3 men dead and buried. And yet, she walked away every time. A ghost with chains around her wrists. 1848, Bryan County. One more downfall added to her trail. Now I ask you, if a house starts collapsing the moment a stranger enters, is it the stranger you fear, or the house? By the time Celeste reached her 4th owner, I expected the pattern. Death, grief, secrets unraveling. But the next collapse was different. It didn't begin with sickness or whispered confessions. It began with children. Her 4th buyer was William Trentham of McIntosh County. A young widower still grieving, left alone to raise 3 small children, ages 7, 5, and 3. He bought Celeste not as a symbol of desire, not as a status ornament, but simply because he needed help. And that is what makes what happened next even harder to read. Unlike the wealthy households before, Trentham Plantation was smaller, simpler, built on routine and the soft noise of children running across wooden floors. And into this tired, grieving home, Celeste stepped quietly, like a shadow learning the shape of each room. The children didn't trust her at first. They whispered about the quiet woman who never smiled. But children, more than adults, adapt to silence. They began to follow her around the house, curious, watching her every movement. One of them, the oldest boy, later wrote an account in adulthood. I found it buried in a family collection in Charleston. She told stories in a voice you had to lean forward to hear. Stories about rivers that wait. Stones that change rivers. Seeds that live under snow for years before they break open. Seeds that live under snow. Rivers that wait. Again, this theme of patience. Not violence. Not rebellion. Patience. While Celeste cared for the children, the plantation itself began to show strange signs of instability. Financial records reveal missing shipments, cotton bales recorded as sent, that never arrived in Savannah. The overseer insisted the cargo had left the field. Buyers insisted they never received it. Someone was lying, or someone was stealing. But Trentham was too lost in grief to fight these battles. Instead of tightening control, he loosened it. Instead of reviewing accounts, he avoided them. Instead of questioning the overseer, he drank. Grief makes a man blind. Blind men run farms into the ground. Small cracks in operations became deep fractures. Overseers argued with drivers. Drivers accused field workers. The enslaved workers felt the tension and grew restless. Productivity fell. And then came the fire. On October 1848, just after dusk settled over the fields, a bright orange glow rose from the cotton barn, the largest structure on the property, the one holding 3/4 of the year's harvest. Witnesses described the flames as unnatural, fast, devouring. Cotton burns like dry paper. Once it catches, it becomes a roaring furnace. Trentham ran barefoot into the yard, screaming orders. But it was too late. The entire year's profit, his entire chance at recovering financially, turned into ash that drifted across the night sky like black snow. The local sheriff's report was blunt. Arson. Someone had placed oil-soaked rags under the floorboards. The overseer fled the same night. Trentham collapsed within days. His letters turned frantic, disorganized. He accused everyone, his neighbors, his workers, the merchants in town. He didn't sleep, didn't eat. His children wrote years later that he would wake drenched in sweat, muttering about shadows moving through the fields. In a world built on control, losing control is death. On Christmas Eve, Trentham saddled his horse and rode alone into the swamps south of the plantation. He didn't return. 3 days later, they found his body in shallow water, only 4 feet deep. A grown, sober man could walk out of water that shallow. But grief, fear, whispers in the night, the weight of collapse. Sometimes these drown a man deeper than any river. The sheriff ruled it accidental. A neighbor wrote privately that it was suicide. The children grew up believing he simply disappeared into the swamp. And Celeste? Once again, she remained untouched. When the estate was auctioned in early 1849, she stood quietly on the platform, hands folded, eyes distant. Her price dropped again, from $900 to $500. For the 4th time, she went to a new home. But the most chilling part wasn't the death or the fire. It was what Trentham's oldest child wrote in that memoir I found. She was kind to us. I don't think she meant harm. But when she looked at my father, it was like she saw something inside him he didn't want anyone else to see. Something inside him. The same pattern again. Not poison. Not knives. Not rebellion. Reflection. Exposure. A mirror held up to a man who wasn't ready to see himself. Trentham didn't die because Celeste arrived. He died because the life he had been avoiding finally caught up to him. 4 estates gone. 4 men dead. 4 families destroyed. And yet she kept moving, house to house, estate to estate, like a cold wind passing through a dying system. 1849 McIntosh County. 3 small children lost their father. A plantation turned to ash. Now ask yourself, if destruction follows someone again and again, is that person cursed? Or are they the only one who sees the truth? By the time Celeste reached her 5th and 6th owners, something remarkable began to happen. People started whispering. Not openly, whispers in the South never start openly. But behind closed doors, behind lace curtains at church gatherings, behind fans at summer socials, people mentioned that girl. The one who moved like quiet water. The one whose masters never lived long and never died easy. But the 3 buyers who came next didn't believe in superstition. They believed in profit. These men, Thomas Beaumont, Richard Howell, and Samuel Yates, were business partners. They weren't friends. They weren't family. They were practical men who pooled resources to operate a massive rice plantation in Camden County. A consortium. Shared ownership. Shared profit. Shared decisions. And foolishly, they chose to share Celeste. They bought her together in early 1849, splitting her cost like a business expense. She was assigned to the main plantation house, which all 3 families visited on rotation. She was no longer serving grief-stricken widows or lonely men. Now she stood at the center of a partnership held together by thin trust, and that thinness began to split the moment she arrived. At first it was small. Whispers of bad accounting. Suspicions about field yields. Rumors that Howell had hidden profits the year prior. Arguments over how many enslaved workers were needed on the dikes. Letters returned with curt responses. Tension in every meeting. Rice plantations are fragile machines. One broken dike, one misjudged tide, one careless overseer, and the entire crop dies. And something in their partnership was already cracking. Celeste simply made the cracks visible. A driver named Tobias, interviewed decades later, said, when she walked in the room, the 3 men stopped talking. Like she reminded them of something they did not want to say. By midsummer, the tension had stretched too thin. Their overseers complained that Beaumont contradicted Howell. Howell contradicted Yates. Yates contradicted everyone. In their arrogance, they believed they controlled the land. But rice fields don't forgive arrogance. In August 1849, the storm came. Not from the sky, though the rains that season were heavier than usual, but from the river. The tide swelled higher than previous years, crashing against the dikes with unusual force. The slaves working the night shift reported something strange. The dikes had been weakened at specific points. Not washed away. Not damaged by nature. Deliberate sabotage. To this day, no one knows who did it. The 3 partners blamed each other. The overseers blamed rival planters. Some whispered a rebellious slave had done it. Others whispered that the river had finally decided to swallow the fields whole. Within hours, the plantation's entire rice crop was drowned under feet of brackish water. Months of labor, gone. Thousands of dollars, gone. Their partnership shattered. Beaumont accused Howell of neglect. Howell accused Beaumont of plotting to buy the plantation cheaply. Yates accused them both. Meetings turned into shouting matches. Shouting matches turned into threats. Threats turned into legal petitions. And then death came again. On September 14, 1849, Beaumont's carriage overturned on a clear road in broad daylight. His driver survived. He didn't. The driver swore the horses spooked at nothing. 3 weeks later, Howell died of fever. The same fever that seemed to appear whenever a man owned Celeste. Yates panicked. He petitioned the court to dissolve the partnership, sold his share at a loss, moved his family inland, far from the marshes and the memories. And what about Celeste? She was sold separately, her price sinking to $300, a number suggesting people were getting nervous. Something about her history was beginning to taint her market value. Yet no one could point to a crime. No one could accuse her directly. No one could say she raised a hand or uttered a threat. She simply existed in spaces where powerful men were already unstable. When I stood at the edge of the old rice fields, now just quiet marshland, I tried to imagine that night. The sound of water breaking through wood. The shouts in the dark. The torches reflecting off rising waves. The three men realizing their empire was drowning. And somewhere in the house behind them, Celeste was probably sitting quietly, hands folded, waiting. Not planning. Not acting. Just waiting for a system built on greed to devour itself. 6 estates ruined. 6 men dead or gone. Half the pattern complete. And yet, no document, no witness, no overseer ever accused her, not once. It wasn't fear that silenced people. It was confusion. Shame. The knowledge that the collapse came from inside each house, not from her hands. This was the moment I finally understood. Celeste wasn't a storm. She was the pressure that made weak structures collapse. 1849 Camden County. 3 men. 1 partnership. 1 silent woman standing in the doorway while everything they built washed away. Tell me, if you watched 3 proud men fall apart in the same room, would you still believe in coincidence? If the 3-planter collapse was loud, arguments, lawsuits, drowned fields, the next chapter in Celeste's trail was something quieter and far more terrifying. Her 7th buyer, Edmund Grayson, believed in logic. He believed in numbers and records and structure. He believed he was smarter than rumor, smarter than fear, smarter than the whispering wives at church socials who warned him not to buy that girl from the cursed estates. He bought her anyway. He told his factor in Savannah, "Men fail because they are weak. I'm not weak." That line appears in 3 letters. A declaration, a warning, a prophecy. Grayson lived at Palmetto Grove, a mid-sized Sea Island cotton estate, 300 acres, 43 enslaved workers, and an overseer named Jacob Turner, a war-hardened man who ran the fields like a military camp. Turner kept meticulous weekly reports. And because he kept those reports, because he wrote things down, we can trace the exact moment the plantation began to break. His first entry after Celeste's arrival. She works quiet. The others avoid her. Nothing unusual yet. Yet. That word told me even Turner felt something unsettling beneath the surface. But Grayson dismissed it all. He assigned her to personal service, cleaning his study, preparing meals, maintaining his quarters, because he believed the best way to debunk superstition was to place the so-called source of misfortune directly under his own nose. For a while, everything seemed normal. Cotton yields were strong. The overseer kept order. The enslaved workers followed routine. Then the nightmares began. The first evidence appears in Grayson's private journal, a set of leather-bound pages I found in the Liberty County Courthouse archives. The handwriting is careful at first, then shaky, then frantic. The earliest disturbed entry. Woken twice by dreams of drowning. The room felt wet when I opened my eyes. Then, saw movement in the corner tonight. Nothing there. Then, food tastes bitter. I do not trust the cook. Or the water. Within weeks, the dreams became hallucinations. He wrote, "Someone breathes in the hallway at night. The mirrors warp my reflection. I hear chains, but none exist in this house." I showed these entries to a historian who specializes in antebellum mental illness. She closed the file and said, "This was paranoia. Extreme paranoia. Something triggered it. What triggered it? The records don't say. But Turner's next report gives a clue. Tools missing. Corn barn lock broken. No signs of theft. 3 field hands attempted escape, unusual for this property. Escapes rarely happened at Palmetto Grove. Turner's control was too strict. Grayson's punishments too swift. So why those attempts? Why then? Because fear spreads like fire. And Celeste's presence had changed the air again. Field workers avoided her. House servants refused to be alone with her. The cook reported feeling watched. The stable boy claimed she whispered to the horses, though no one else ever heard a word from her. Everything became unstable. And in unstable systems, disaster finds an opening. On April 19, 1850, Grayson shot his overseer, Jacob Turner, in cold blood. Grayson insisted Turner attacked him. But the body told a different story. 1 bullet. From behind. Straight through the heart. The sheriff's notes described Grayson's state at the time of arrest. Disheveled. Pale. Eyes unfocused. Speaking in fragments. Accusing everyone in the house of conspiring against him. The prosecutor didn't need Celeste's name. He didn't need curses or shadows or whispered legends. He had proof. A dead overseer. Erratic letters. A journal filled with spiraling madness. The jury took only 6 hours. Guilty of manslaughter. 15 years in the Milledgeville State Penitentiary. Grayson's estate was seized to pay the overseer's widow. The enslaved workers were sold to creditors. The farm was dismantled within weeks. And Celeste? Listed in the inventory as Lot 17. Sold for $200, a shocking drop for someone with her skills. Her price told its own story. People didn't want her. Not because she was dangerous, but because she made men dangerous to themselves. When I read the final line in Grayson's journal, I had to close the book for a moment. My hands were shaking. This was his last coherent entry, written days before the murder. She does nothing. Says nothing. But when she stands behind me, I feel judgment. Not hers. My own. That line pierced me, because this was the truth no one wanted to say aloud. Celeste didn't break these men. She made them see the pieces they were already breaking from. Grayson died in prison 2 years later. Fever, they said. His grave is unmarked. 7 estates gone. 7 men dead, broken, or buried. 7 families scattered like wind-blown ashes. And still she moved on. Quiet. Slow. Unbroken. Now tell me, if a silent woman can unravel a mind built on cruelty, what does that say about the mind? What does that say about the cruelty? By the time Celeste arrived at her 8th estate, the whispers about her weren't whispers anymore. They were warnings, quiet, urgent, carefully spoken behind gloved hands at church gatherings and courthouse meetings. But warnings don't matter to desperate men. And Henry Drayton was a desperate man. His plantation, Riverbend, stood on a lonely stretch of the Midway River. A crumbling 2-story house, sagging porches, and fields that hadn't yielded properly in years. His wife had died 2 winters earlier, leaving him with a grieving, half-mad mother upstairs and a household slipping into chaos. He didn't buy Celeste for beauty. He didn't buy her for desire. He bought her because he needed control. Someone to restore order to the rotting house he lived in. He paid only $200. A fraction of her first price. A price that said more than any rumor ever could. I found Henry Drayton's letters in a family archive. One of the first mentions of Celeste said, "She is quiet, efficient, but something about her presence compels my mother to speak. Too much." That line becomes important. Because Drayton's mother, Adelaide, was the key to everything that followed. The old woman who wouldn't stop talking. Adelaide Drayton was 73. Frail. Forgetful. Yet once Celeste began attending her, something changed. Servants reported it first. Miss Adelaide talkin' all night. She tellin' things she never told nobody. Every time Celeste sit by her bed, the old woman opens like a book. And what came out of her mouth was ruin. She confessed secrets she shouldn't even remember. She told Celeste about forged shipping manifests, land stolen from a Creek family in 1821, a smuggling ring her husband ran with coastal traders, unpaid debts hidden in falsified ledgers, a child her husband fathered with an enslaved woman, then sold away. All of this, spoken aloud in that crumbling house, with Celeste sitting silently at her bedside. And Celeste? She said almost nothing. She didn't coax or threaten. She simply sat. And the old woman confessed. When you read the testimony of the enslaved house servants, a pattern emerges. When Miss Celeste in the room, Miss Adelaide speak the truth. She talk like she must talk or else choke on the words. It wasn't magic. It wasn't supernatural. It was something far simpler. Celeste's presence forced people to confront what they already feared. And Adelaide Drayton had spent a lifetime burying things. The storm breaks. Adelaide died in early September 1850. Peacefully. But the peace lasted only a day. Because the guests at her funeral whispered about her last words. Stories spread faster than the river wind. By October, county officials were knocking on Henry's door. "Sir, your land title is under review. Sir, we have questions about your shipping records. Sir, did your father engage in illegal trade?" Drayton panicked. He had spent years covering his family's crimes. Now they were rising like swamp gas to choke him. He shut himself in his study and stopped speaking to anyone but Celeste. Letters from creditors piled up unopened. His cotton factor in Savannah cut ties. The bank withdrew his credit line. Neighbors stopped visiting. One night, a servant overheard him shouting, "Why did she tell you all that? Why did she say those things to you?" But Celeste never responded. She simply stood there in silence, letting his words collapse under their own weight. The fall of Riverbend. On December 8, 1850, the sheriff arrived with a warrant for Drayton's arrest. Customs fraud, land theft, false claims. But Drayton was already gone. He fled into the marshes behind the house. Some said he planned to reach a boat. Others said he meant to disappear into the swamps. He never made it out. 3 days later, fishermen found his body tangled in reeds, half buried in mud. The river had swallowed him quietly, no struggle, no broken bones, no violence. Just a man sinking under the weight of his own secrets. A man undone by truth. The sale. Riverbend was seized by the county. Everything, furniture, livestock, enslaved workers, was sold to pay restitution. Celeste appeared in the inventory as Lot 42, female, 27. Quiet. Kill. No defects. She sold for $150. That price was not an insult. It was a warning. A scarlet mark the market had placed on her name. A mark every buyer pretended not to see, until it was too late. The pattern grows sharper. At this point in the research I paused. 8 estates. 8 collapses. 8 moments where a single woman sat silently in the middle of men who had built their lives on lies. None of them fell because of violence. None fell because of revolt. None fell because of poison or knives or rebellion. They fell because they were already rotting. Celeste simply sat there long enough for the rot to show. Historians often ask, was she cursed? Was she dangerous? Was she strategic? But reading these documents, I realized something far simpler. She was the mirror they could not bear to look into. 8 down, 4 to go. And next, the 9th owner would reveal the most chilling truth yet. Ask yourself, if a woman's silence can destroy a legacy, what does that say about the legacy? By the time Celeste reached her 9th owner, the pattern wasn't just rumor anymore. It had become a shadow, one that followed her from county to county, whispering ahead of her arrival like a warning wind. Her new owner, David Crawford, was unlike the others. He wasn't desperate like Drayton. He wasn't grieving like Hartwell. He wasn't arrogant like Fenwick or unstable like Grayson. He was organized, methodical, a plantation scientist. His diaries were so detailed that historians still use them to study agricultural patterns from the 1850s. And that, ironically, is what made his collapse so terrifying. Because on paper, Crawford was the one man who shouldn't have fallen. But he did. And he fell faster than any before him. The arrival of a silent question. Crawford purchased Celeste in January 1851. Price, $300. Condition, quiet, healthy, skilled. His first diary entry after bringing her home reads, she performs duties well. No issues. But she watches, too intently. At first, he assigned her to laundry and cleaning. But soon he moved her into the dining room, then into his study. He wrote, she disturbs nothing. Yet when she closes the door behind her, the room feels altered. It's small details like this that reveal the psychological unraveling before the real damage even begins. Because Crawford wasn't frightened of her. He was fascinated. The journal changes. For 2 decades, Crawford kept perfect plantation logs, planting cycles, slave health schedules, crop yield predictions, equipment maintenance, supply inventories. His handwriting was steady, precise, almost mechanical. But within weeks of Celeste's arrival, something changed. The first shift is subtle. Instead of crop updates, he writes, she makes no sound when she walks. How does she do that? Then, today she looked at me as if she knew something. Something I've forgotten. Then, I oversee hundreds of acres, yet I feel observed. By March, his journals become fragmented. Fragments of guilt, fragments of memory, fragments of self. One entry reads, I sold a child in 46. I have not thought of it since. Why now? Another. She does not accuse me. That's the worst part. Her silence is worse than judgment. Crawford was a man who prided himself on mental discipline. But you can't discipline something you refuse to face. And Celeste had a way of making men face themselves. The fog of guilt. By April, his routine slipped. He stopped inspecting the barns. Stopped reviewing the financial ledgers. Stopped supervising the overseer. Turner, the same overseer who later died under Grayson, left a note about this period. Mr. Crawford stay in his study all day. Door closed. Celeste serve him food but he do not eat. From the enslaved workers' oral accounts, we learn this. Crawford no longer gave instructions. He wandered the property at night. He asked strange questions like, have you ever felt someone thinking behind your back? Or, do you think a soul can be weighed? He told a field hand. She's looking into me, not at me. The fire. On July 23, 1851, at 2:14 a.m., the cotton barn caught fire. Witnesses said they saw flames bursting from the eastern wall, a smoke rising like a column of ash, glowing embers drifting into the night sky. Crawford didn't grab a bucket, didn't shout orders. Didn't even run. He stood barefoot in the yard, watching his year's income burn away in silence. He didn't try to stop the flames. He didn't speak. He simply watched. One witness said. He watched like a man staring at his own coffin. The fire destroyed 3/4 of the crop. Weeks later, one of the enslaved men admitted privately, "We didn't set it. But none of us saved it either." That single sentence reveals everything. The system didn't fall because of Celeste. It fell because no one believed the owners deserved to be saved. The break. After the fire, Crawford stopped writing in his plantation logs entirely. But he did keep writing, in a second notebook that I found decades later in a courthouse basement. The entries are disturbing. Her silence speaks louder than screams. "I never noticed slaves looking at me. Now I can feel their eyes. Every cruelty returns. Every death. She stands behind me even when she's not in the room." The final entry before he abandoned the plantation reads, "There is a reckoning in her quiet. She doesn't bring it. She reminds me that it is already here." Days later he walked away from everything. Sold the estate at a loss. Moved to Charleston. Lived in boarding rooms. Died in 1856. Alone, broke, forgotten. Celeste was sold again. 9th estate gone. 9 down. 3 to go. The question that haunts this chapter. When I finished reading the Crawford journals, one thought stayed with me. She never hurt anyone. She never planned anything. She never lifted a hand. But men fell apart simply by being seen by her. So the real question isn't what Celeste did. The real question is, what were these men terrified she could see? By the 10th sale, Celeste's name had become a kind of omen. Spoken softly, carefully, the way sailors speak of storms they can't avoid. Her next buyer, Robert Bennington, was a man who believed he could steer through any storm. A rice planter. A former military officer. A man who commanded men with a voice sharp enough to cut through fog. If anyone could resist the slow unraveling that followed her, it should have been him. But history doesn't care who should survive. Only who does. The soldier who believed fear was a choice. Bennington ran his plantation like a battlefield. Routine at sunrise, inspections at noon, punishments swift, books balanced weekly. The enslaved workers feared him, but they respected the predictable brutality of his system. Even cruelty feels stable when it never changes shape. He bought Celeste in October 1851. Price: $270. That's what a rumor-filled name cost. He assigned her to field work under direct supervision. No house duties. No night tasks. No contact with the children. No food preparation. No unsupervised movement. He wasn't superstitious. He wasn't emotional. He was a soldier. And soldiers know how to control variables. But what he didn't understand is that Celeste was never the variable. The system was. The first cracks. For nearly a month, Bennington's operation ran as usual. Then the letters began. The first letter to his cousin said, "The nights are too quiet. Even the frogs stop when she walks by." Then, "I keep seeing something in her eyes. Not threat. Not fear. Just patience." Then, "What does she wait for?" By early November, his tone shifted again. "I never realized how many ways a man can be watched." Bennington, the rationalist, the commander, the iron-willed planter, had begun to feel something he never felt before. Self-doubt. And self-doubt is poison to a man who rules by fear. The system feels the weakness. The enslaved workers sensed it first. Because a plantation is a machine made of human pressure. And a machine reacts instantly when the hand controlling it shakes. Field hands worked slower. They whispered more. They watched Bennington's face when he passed, looking for cracks. The overseer, who relied on Bennington's stability, began questioning his commands. Even his neighbors noticed something was off. One entry in the diary of a nearby planter read, "Bennington looks thinner. Distracted. Talks of shadows." He wasn't sick. He wasn't cursed. He was unraveling under the weight of everything he'd built. The river. Rice plantations rely on water. Water that must be controlled, channeled, elevated, lowered. A single mistake can destroy an entire field. Bennington knew this. He supervised the irrigation himself. But in December, witnesses say they saw him walking the banks barefoot, muttering to himself, staring at the water like it was speaking to him. A field hand reported. He sit near the water for hours. Don't blink. Don't move. Just sit. Another said. He look at Miss Celeste like he want ask something, but he's scared of the answer. On the last day of his life, Bennington wrote one final letter. It was never sent. It lay folded in his desk drawer, now browned with age. It said, "I understand now. She sees what we try not to see. She is not our fear. She is what fear looks like when it opens its eyes." That same evening, his body was found face down in his rice field. The water was only 3 feet deep. A grown man, a trained military officer, a strong swimmer, drowned. His boots were unlaced, his coat removed, as if he walked willingly into the water, as if he accepted something none of us can fully name. The coroner wrote accidental death, but the overseer who found the body whispered to neighbors. He wasn't pushed. He wasn't drunk. He walked into the water like he knew it was time. The aftermath. His plantation began collapsing immediately. Creditors swarmed like vultures. The overseer fled with stolen money. The slaves were sold in 3 separate auctions. The rice fields flooded and never recovered. And Celeste? Sold again. Her price dropped further, to $200. 10 plantations gone. 10 men destroyed mentally, physically, or financially. And through every auction she walked with the same quiet steps, the same distant eyes, the same unbroken silence. It wasn't magic. It wasn't witchcraft. It wasn't poison. It was the simplest truth of all. Plantations were built to break human beings. They were never prepared for someone who refused to break. Bennington didn't fall because of her. He fell because of himself, and because the system he believed he controlled was already rotting under his feet. So I ask you, if a system collapses whenever one quiet woman enters it, was the system strong? Or was the woman simply the only honest thing inside it? By the time Celeste was sold for the 11th time, the Georgia coast had split into 2 kinds of men, those who feared her, and those who feared nothing, until they owned her. Her next master, Charles Hartford, belonged to the second group, a young widower, educated, well-connected, a man raised on inheritance and pride, not labor and sense. He purchased her in January 1852. Price, $180. The auctioneer wrote beside her listing, "Buyer informed of prior history." Informed or not, Hartford didn't care. He believed what so many men believed before they broke. Other men were weak. I am not. The House of Haunted Echoes. Charles Hartford lived in a grand house overlooking the marsh. White columns, high ceilings, imported rugs, mahogany furniture polished so brightly it reflected candle flames like water. But despite the elegance, the house felt hollow, as if every sound echoed too long, as if the walls remembered grief. Hartford's wife had died 3 years earlier in childbirth, and nothing in the house had moved since. Her dresses still hung in the wardrobe. Her perfume bottles still sat on the vanity. Her letters remained on the bedside table. He kept his grief like he kept his wealth. Neatly arranged, never touched, never questioned. Until Celeste entered his home. The brother's testimony. Luckily, we don't have to guess what happened next. We have a witness. Charles's brother, Marcus Hartford, lived on an adjacent property and visited often. His letters, found in a family attic in 1938, provide the clearest account of the 11th collapse. He wrote, "The first month seemed ordinary. Celeste did her work in silence. Charles felt no unease. He told me she was better behaved than most servants. But then the tone changes." Marcus writes, "By February, I noticed Charles had grown restless. He complained about sleeplessness. He claimed the house felt too quiet at night. But when I visited, I heard nothing unusual. Then he began avoiding mirrors. Then he said the light bent strangely when she walked past. By March, his handwriting grows jagged, urgent. What disturbs me most is not her behavior, but what she seems to awaken in him. The house grows smaller. Charles stopped dining downstairs. He ate alone in his study. He refused to enter his late wife's room, but he also refused to close the door. He told Marcus, "She stands in the hallway sometimes. Not close. Just far enough that I can't tell what she's thinking." And yet, Marcus insisted Celeste never changed her behavior. She did the same work, spoke the same minimal words, followed the same silent patterns. The change wasn't in Celeste. It was in Charles. Because when a man is already breaking, silence becomes a hammer. The paranoia blooms. Hartford's diary, the few pages we have, reveals the psychological descent clearly. "I hear breathing behind me when I write. She never rushes. That terrifies me. Why does the house feel smaller? I see my wife in the corner of my eye. The slaves stop talking when I enter a room. I am losing time. Is she judging me? Or am I judging myself?" The last line is repeated 6 times across 3 pages. The breaking point. In April, Hartford became convinced that his enslaved workers were conspiring against him. He accused them randomly, not based on evidence, but based on a feeling that someone was waiting for him to fall. Marcus tried to calm him. Neighbors offered help. The local doctor diagnosed acute nervous agitation. But nothing stopped the descent. Marcus wrote, "On the last day of April, I found him in the cotton fields before sunrise, barefoot, coat missing, speaking to the air as if someone stood beside him. When asked what he was doing, Charles said, 'She knows. She knows what I did. And the land knows too.' No one knows what he meant. Only that he repeated those words again and again. The final night. Marcus described the night his brother finally broke. We heard screaming just after midnight. When I reached the fields, Charles was naked, covered in mud, shouting at the sky. He spoke of debts, blood, judgment, and the faces of men and women he could no longer forget. He had ripped up handfuls of cotton. He had thrown stones at the moon. He had clawed at the earth as if trying to bury himself. It took 6 men to restrain him. The county physician diagnosed acute mania. He was committed to the Milledgeville State Asylum where he remained until his death in 1867. He never regained clarity. He spent his final years insisting someone stood behind him, whispering truths he didn't want to hear. The 11th sale. The estate collapsed immediately. Creditors seized assets. The overseer fled. The slaves were sold. The land was abandoned. The family name was whispered with embarrassment. And Celeste? Listed as Lot 11, female 25. Silent. No recorded defects. Sold for $120. The lowest price yet. Not because she was weak, but because every man who bought her became weaker. And people fear what reflects truth back at them. Ask yourself, if a system collapses every time someone looks too closely at it, what was that system built on? Strength or lies? By the time Celeste stepped onto the auction block for the 12th time, Savannah's air had changed. People didn't whisper anymore. They stepped back. They looked at her the way people look at a storm brewing offshore. They didn't know what she was, but they knew what followed her. Her final buyer, Alexander Vaughn, was nothing like the others. He was young, only 32. Educated, Princeton 2 years. Rich, 2,000 acres of prime cotton along the Liberty County coast. And most importantly, he believed in nothing but logic. The rumors about Celeste irritated him, not frightened him. He reviewed her entire sale history like a mathematician studying a problem. 12 estates, 12 collapses, 12 men who made the same mistake. And he came to one conclusion. They weren't destroyed by her. They were destroyed by their own weakness. He bought her for $100, not because he wanted her, but because he wanted to prove the world wrong. In his mind, she wasn't a curse. She was a test. The control experiment. Vaughn ran his plantation like a military camp. His overseer, Patrick Sullivan, was a former soldier who respected precision, discipline, and fear. Before Celeste even arrived, Vaughn issued 3 orders. She would work only in the fields. She would never be left unsupervised. Every movement, task, and interaction would be recorded. It was the most controlled environment she had ever been placed in. And for a short time, a very short time, it worked. 3 weeks passed with no strange events. No illnesses, no sabotage, no arguments, no collapses. Vaughn wrote in his journal, "Superstition is the refuge of weak minds." He was feeling triumphant. Until one night, a driver named Isaac found Celeste standing alone near the cotton barn, staring up at the rafters silently. When he asked what she was doing, she said, "Can't sleep. Needed air." Then she returned to her cabin without looking back. On paper, it was nothing. But history proves that with Celeste, nothing was always the beginning. The deaths begin again. First came the poisoning scare. 4 slaves collapsed after eating from the same food pot. Their gums turned blue-black. Their stomachs seized. The doctor suspected lead contamination. Not enough to kill, but enough to terrify. Then Vaughn's prize breeding bull, worth more than most men's houses, was found dead in its pen. No wounds, no illness, just dead. Then someone tampered with the water barrels meant for field workers. Not enough toxin to cause permanent harm, but enough to make a dozen people sick. Vaughn tracked every incident, documented every interview, calculated every possibility. Yet still, the chaos spread. Fear grew. Whispers grew. Suspicion grew. A plantation is a machine made of human obedience. But once fear enters the gears, the machine grinds itself apart. Vaughn felt it slipping. And Celeste? She didn't act frightened. She didn't hide. She simply watched the machine break. The interrogation. On September 5th, Vaughn brought Celeste into the overseer's office. He sat across from her with Sullivan and Isaac at his sides. He said, "You know why you're here?" Her response was soft, calm, infuriating. "Yes, sir." He questioned her for an hour. She denied everything. No poison. No sabotage. No conspiracies. Then Vaughn tried a different angle. 12 estates collapsed after buying you. Explain that. For the first time in 5 years, Celeste showed emotion. A flicker of something sharp in her eyes. Her answer was simple and devastating. "I don't do anything, sir. Men destroy themselves." Sullivan lunged, but Vaughn stopped him. Celeste continued, "Every man who buys me wants something he shouldn't. Every man who buys me is already weak. I don't push them. I just watch them fall." Then Isaac, the only enslaved man brave enough to speak, asked, "Why don't you run? Why not poison them? Why not fight back?" Celeste turned to him fully. Her voice didn't shake. "Because running gets you killed. Poison gets you killed. Fighting gets you killed. But surviving? Surviving breaks them. That is the line that will stay with me until I die." She survived a system designed to crush her by turning the system's own cracks against it. She didn't need violence. She only needed time. The audit that broke the lie. Vaughn locked her in the plantation jail and launched a full investigation, something no other owner had ever done. For 2 weeks he inspected ledgers, supply chains, slave interviews, overseer budgets, shipping contracts, field reports, building inventories, and he discovered the truth. The poison wasn't hers. It came from old paint dust in the kitchen rafters. The sabotaged water wasn't hers. 2 enslaved brothers contaminated the barrel to avoid being sold south. The dead bull wasn't hers. It had a hidden heart defect. The theft wasn't hers. Sullivan had been embezzling for 18 months. Thousands of dollars skimmed quietly. The system wasn't cursed. It was collapsing under its own cruelty. And Celeste? She was the one person who saw it clearly. The decision no one expected. On October 1st, 1852, Alexander Vaughn walked into the Chatham County Courthouse. And he freed her. He signed the papers, placed $50 in her hand, gave her a letter of introduction. Not because he pitied her. Not because he feared her. Because he finally understood. She wasn't the collapse. She was the mirror. Every man who looked into her saw himself, and shattered. She walked out of Savannah that afternoon, and vanished from the historical record. No grave, no census entry, no final witness, just silence. The same silence she carried through 12 plantations, 12 families, 12 collapses. Celeste didn't survive because she was supernatural. She survived because she understood cruelty better than the men who enforced it. So I leave you with the question historians still can't answer. Was she avenging herself? Or was she avenging every enslaved person who never got the chance? If you're still watching, you care about the stories history tried to bury. Subscribe, comment your city, and watch the next chapter of Hidden American History.